Today is Thursday, February 22nd, 2024. My name is Hannah Sun, and I'm here today with Mr. Joseph Yu on behalf of the Houston Asian American Archive at Rice University. Hello.
Hello.
So to start, can you please state your full name and where and when you were born for the archive?
My full legal name is Sung Ung Yu. I was born in a small city in South Korea called Pohang in 1980. And yeah, what was the other
No, that's wonderful. Thank you
question?
so much.
Okay.
And so could you start by describing the household you grew up in?
So, yeah, my dad is or was an active pastor, so I grew up as a pastor's kid. And We moved to the States when I was 6 years old, and um, and then we moved to California first, and then moved to South Carolina. And it was very it was still a strict house, growing up, strict rules and all that because parents were immigrants and all that stuff. But I think one of the things that I've noticed about my dad, looking back, that's different from other pastors, Korean pastor men, is that my dad was always went out of the way to show affection towards my brother and I, which as a teenager was really annoying because my dad was always up on my business, telling us how much he loved me and all that stuff. I'm like, yeah, yeah, whatever. But I think that was a very important no, I think it was very important that was displayed for us, for my brother and I. And my brother is 7 years younger than me, so we've also had completely different experience of childhood growing up. Where and I guess the firstborn thing is different too, but I had far more responsibilities and burdens and things to live up to compared to my brother who got away with almost everything, I feel like. But um I don't think we're that much different from any other immigrant families that grew up in churches. But it was a very religious and strict and but yet still full of love of a household growing up. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Could you also speak to, do you have any memories in Korea in Pohang prior to immigrating?
I have like random bits of memories in Korea. So like um I have a, I have a vivid memory of being 5 or 6. It was like right before we moved to America. My friends and I from church, obviously, because I guess that's where our social network was. We would go. We went to catch grasshoppers, those big green grasshoppers, and brought them to my home. Brought it to my mom, and my mom like fry panned them, cooked them, and it. I distinctly remember and they were red after my mom, cooked them, and then I still like remember the crunchiness of the sound that it made when you like bit down on it. And then I was just sharing with my wife and my friend. I have this also just random memory of being at a being on at a bus station, and my dad and I got on the bus, but my dad got off the bus to get us a snack from the snack person like that's like right there. And then the bus next to us started backing out. But when the car next to you backs out, it kind of feels like your car's backing out. So I thought that the bus was leaving, and I remember just like crying and yelling and then like hitting on the window saying, "Dad, the bus is leaving." And my dad comes running in, and obviously the bus wasn't leaving. So like those little like I don't there's just some random like that don't make sense. It's tidbits that just exist in my head in Korea, but I don't have that much memory of my life in Korea before we moved to the States.
And with your family's move to the state, was that because of your family's work? What was the reason for your immigration?
So my mom's side of the family moved to the States first. They moved to the Azusa area, West Covina area of Southern California. And I think my aunts and uncle was always trying to coax my mom to come to the States. And it definitely most likely probably was for the sake of me. Because I guess my parents were told that there's a greater chance of success or whatever if you for your child if you move over to the States. Because my dad didn't have a job here for about a year. He was when we were in LA for that year, we were my dad was jobless, and then my dad got the job in a church calling in South Carolina. That's why we moved there. So I genuinely think it was um my dad left everything behind because at least my mom had family. We were moving to where my mom had family, but my dad left his work, his church, his family, and all that stuff behind. And I'm pretty sure I played because my brother wasn't born yet. I played a huge factor in why we immigrated to the States.
Right, right. And I understand that you lived in several different US cities throughout your childhood, or maybe just before college. Could you share a little bit about where you were and describe those neighborhoods?
Yeah, so we moved to first we moved to Azusa in California. That's where we first landed because my grandparents and mom's side of the family were there. And then we moved to Columbia, South Carolina, and we were there for 5 years, I think 1987 to 1982, 1992. And then we moved to Santa Barbara, California, was there for about 4 years. And then when I was a high, s- when I was a, when I finished my sophomore year in high school, we moved to Hawaii. And we lived in a city in the middle of Oahu called Mililani. And my dad's church was in another city that's called Waipahu. And then I moved. I went to so yeah, so I did my undergrad in Hawaii. Then I went to DC for seminary, moved back to Hawaii, and then after that, we got married. I got married. My wife and I still moved around a lot, and finally, we're here in Houston, Texas, and I think as a married couple, this is the long. We've been here since 2016, so it's been almost 8 years. This is the longest place that we've lived together as a married couple.
Great, thank you for that. And then could you also speak to whether you were able to find a solid Korean American community in each of those places, if those experiences differed, especially while you were growing up?
Oh man. I still feel this way. Well, maybe not anymore, but especially like before we moved to Hawaii, I've always felt like I wasn't Korean enough for the Koreans, and I wasn't American enough for the Americans. So I was always in this little weird in-between space. In South Carolina, growing up, it was predominantly you're either white or black. I was in all my classes, I was usually the only Asian there. And so, I did I think a lot of people my age with when they immigrated to the States have the same experience when the early 80s or late 80s, early 90s is like the world isn't as big as it is or small as it is now, like where K-pop and whatnot, like just a random American person might know who BTS is, whatever. It wasn't like that. So being the only one of my kind, not being able to find fit in, being made fun of for my name, my Korean name. So my dad just gave me the name Joseph, and so I've been Joseph since first grade. But I have it's not on any of my legal documents or whatnot. I remember the first day we went to school in South Carolina. My mom packed me kimbap and kimchi because that's all she knew how to make. And of course, like during lunchtime, I got mercilessly teased because people were like, "What is that?" Kids were like, "What is that? What's the smell? Oh, gross." And so, I went home crying and asked my mom to make me white people's lunch. And the only thing she knew how to make was a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So for like first grade to like fifth grade, every day lunch was a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So, and I distinctly remember in third grade, praying to God to give me blonde hair and blue eyes because I thought that will make me fit in. So for a very long time, like I went through like, who am I? What am I? Like, I'm not Korean, I'm not American. What am I in this weird in between place? And um, grew up really for the first half of my life, like conscious, able to like really understand who I am, whatever. Grew up really ashamed of being Korean. Like, I didn't want anything associated with Korean because it was, like it didn't seem like to have a space in my life, like or in space society because I couldn't fit in anywhere. And so uh I thought maybe being Anglo would make all my problems go away. And of course, like there's no way for me to do that because my parents just happen to be Asian, so therefore I happen to be Asian. So I just remember this idea of wanting to or desire to fit in and not being able to find a place. And church, I kind of fit, of course in church we fit in because everyone in church was Korean, but like church is once a week. School is 5 days a week, like I see more school people than church people. So there was this heavy desire to like find ways to belong and to fit in. And then when we moved to Hawaii, it was a complete opposite because Hawaii, like in my school, the Asians were predominant. Or I'm not predominant, were dominant, were the majority, where so all of my friends now were like Asian, and that was a whole weird thing. And I think that's when I like junior and senior high school when I started getting back into like the Korean culture and pop culture and like really listening to the first wave of K-pop and whatnot and embracing that there is something to be proud of being um Korean. So I really I don't know if kids who immigrate today might have the same extreme experiences. I'm pretty sure the experiences are the same, but like it was really, really like you were either white or you were not when I was growing up. And it was really childhood was difficult trying to find the place to fit in when no one really understood what it meant to be like why do you take your shoes off when you go to when you go home, like why is the food smell like this, all that stuff. Like you don't have to explain that today because Korean barbecue is like everyone knows what that is and whatnot. So it was just it was I'm glad that we are where we are today, but it was really interesting and difficult growing up in the 90s as an Asian kid.
Right, right. And could you also share in your earlier education the names of like elementary, middle, and high schools that you attended? And then also if there were any teachers in particular or experiences that influenced you during that time?
All right, let me see if I can name all my schools I went to. So I can't tell you the kindergarten school I went to. I can tell you that I went to kindergarten twice. I finished kindergarten in Korea, and then when we moved to LA, the school administration said I have to go back to kindergarten because of the lack of English. And then we went to South Carolina. The elementary school was LW Condor Elementary School. And then I went to Richard Dent, or was it just Dent Middle School for like a year. And then we moved to Santa Barbara. And then from there, I went to sixth grade in Hollister Elementary School. And then seventh and eighth grade in Goleta Valley Junior High School. Ninth and 10th grade in Dos Pueblos High School. And then we moved to Hawaii. And then junior and senior year was Mililani High School, and then I did my undergrad in University of Hawaii Manoa, and then I got my Master's of Divinity in Wesley Theological Seminary. In kindergarten, I remember my first grade teacher, Miss Smiloff, who was I don't know why I remember her. And then in second grade, we had Mr. Bates, who was also a part-time zoo keeper. So every once in a while, he'll bring animals from the zoo. And then I think he left teaching to go be a zoo person for full time. Third grade, I remember Mrs. Ledoux, who was just third grade was my worst year academically. Like I got a lot of spankings in third grade because I genuinely feel like Miss Ledoux just hated kids. And then, oh my gosh, I remember all my elementary school teachers. My fourth grade teacher was Mrs. Owens, who happened to be my favorite teacher. And my fifth grade teacher was Mrs. Thomas. And then when we moved to, anyway, I think the teachers that really impacted me, like where I know, were in high school. There was Mr. Linker, who was my English teacher in ninth grade in Dos Pueblos. And he was just a wild guy, and just funny and entertaining, and I never knew that you could like have this kind of fun in class. That was that the teacher created, the atmosphere that teacher created. There was no need to be a class clown because the teacher was a class clown. And then when we moved to Hawaii, Mr. Murphy was my band teacher. And I think Mr. Murphy had a lot of impact in my life. And now he is the principal of the school that he taught at and the school that we went to. So it's yeah, those teachers, they were all something else. I'm pretty sure it wasn't easy for them either, but I think those teachers are the ones that really stand. Mr. Murphy and Mr. Linker are the ones that you're. Oh, and then in junior in high school, junior in high school was Mr. Tamongdong. No, his name is Tamongdong. We're not supposed to call him Tamongdong. And he was our Hawaiian study teachers, and every Friday he would bring out his ukulele and we'd sing some classic Hawaiian songs. Uh, so just I don't think outside of Mrs. Ledoux, and who knows, maybe, I'm third grade, so maybe, I have I vilified her for no reason, but I never all my teachers were really, really caring, concerning, and caring, and was very concerned over, very loving and very caring for me. So I never had any bad teacher experience. Yeah.
That's great to hear. Thank you. And then also you had mentioned having so many family members who had a background in ministry and then attending church and having a kind of strict Korean upbringing. Could you speak a little bit more to the role that that played in your childhood, both culturally and then also just ministry?
Yeah. It was like the stereotype of Asian immigrant or just immigrant families, particularly Asian, like they want you to be a doctor or a lawyer, and like they push you to be a doctor or lawyer. My parents, uh, I think the story goes, when I was 4 years old in Korea, I asked my dad if I could be a pastor like him, growing up. And apparently my dad took what a 4-year-old said and held that against me. So, they were always pushing me to be in ministry. At one point, my dad would call me 작은 유목사, which means little Reverend you. Um, and so, like, there's no way to ignore the religious aspect of my life from birth. And then up until, like when I was up until 14 or so, I wanted to be like my dad. I wanted to be a pastor because I thought it was cool. And then you start seeing like, you start seeing other things, that the way that people often treat my dad, or the expectations that people have of my dad, and not just of my dad, but his family, like me and whatnot. And I was like, I don't know if I want to be a pastor anymore. But I couldn't tell my dad no. Um, so I kept saying that I was going to be a pastor and hoping to find a way out. But growing up in a Korean church was really, really interesting because I had to people had expectations of me. In high school, when I was in Hawaii, I was hanging out with my friends, and my mom calls me. So this must have been the senior or just starting college, because we didn't have cell phones until then. And she was asking me, "What are you wearing?" And I was just wearing my typical, like, it was the late 90s, early 2000s, so baggy shorts and like kind of like extra large shirts and whatnot, and cap backwards and all that stuff. And I just told her, you saw me wear, and like I wore what I saw. I mean, you saw me wear when I'm still wearing the same thing when I was leaving the house. She said, okay. I was like, why? It's like, well, someone from church called and saw you walking around with your friends at the mall and said that you're dressed up like a very thuggish and just wanted to make sure you're not doing that. And I was like, who? Like, what? Someone called you at home for based on what I was wearing with and hanging out with my friends. So like there's all these like eyes on you from the church folks. So you always felt like you're being watched and assessed and judged. And so that was a weird layer that I don't think many non-PKs had to grow up with. Um, but yeah, it was I don't recommend it, but like what right now I'm trying to make sure that my son doesn't well, my son's on the autism spectrum, but I also just want to make sure that he's free to be who he wants and that there's no pressure for him to like behave a certain way. Obviously, we want him to be like behave, but like we don't want to make sure that he's forced to do things that he's not comfortable with, wear things that he's not comfortable with. So a lot of my a lot of my 30s and now and raising my son is a reaction to a lot of the trauma that I received growing up in the church. And most of the trauma wasn't from my parents. It was from like Sunday school teachers and youth pastors and all that stuff in the very like evangelical conservative way of approaching the Bible where it made sense when I was 13, 14, 15. And then as I got older, you're like, oh no, this doesn't make sense. But you can't ask questions because if you ask questions, you're doubting. And if you're doubting, you're not a bad Christian. You just need to pray more. And you get this cycle of shame and guilt and whatnot. So I am trying to I think I overcompensate in my work now to not bring about shame and guilt in the way we approach faith because that was so prevalent when I was growing up.
Yeah, absolutely. And then before we move to your education and kind of career now, uh, can you just speak to more of your own interests and hobbies in your early life, and also how you started thinking about fields of study and career before you pursued your bachelor's from the University of Hawaii?
You know, I really always liked music. I did band for 4 years, marching band for all 4 years of my high school. And then you know, when we were growing up, we didn't it was possible to do both football and marching band, at least for the first 2 years of your school because before you hit varsity. So, you know, I was really into sports. I realized that oh, so you know, sports was one way to fit in with everyone. And like I wasn't always the best, but I was always quick and fast. So I was always able to play basketball and keep up with the kids and play football and kickball and all that stuff. So sports was very, very big in my childhood because that was the quickest way to make friends and hang out with people. Um, but I knew once I hit high school, like all these guys are like faster and stronger than me. And like I was quick, but I wasn't fast. And I was like, okay, you know, like once I get, if I ever get to varsity, you know, like I'm not going to be able to play as much because these kids are stronger and faster than me. On top of that, we moved to Hawaii, and then when I was trying to figure out if I'd go play football or do band, because I couldn't do both anymore, I was going back and forth, and then I found out that the marching band was going to march in the Rose Bowl parade. That year, so I was like, "Oh, I'm going to, you know, that's another way back to California." So, I joined the marching band, and I think, you know, there were so many things I wanted to be that I realized I couldn't because I didn't have the talent. Like I wanted to be a comic book artist, but then I realized, oh, I couldn't draw. I wanted to be like this musician, and I realized that my brother got all the music talent, and I just got, you know, the basic. Like I can sing and I could somewhat kick rhythm. And then so you know, I entered college. I didn't know what I wanted to be. I knew that by then I don't want to be a pastor, but I was always fascinated. I took AP psychology in my senior year, mainly because all my friends were taking it. And I really liked it. So I decided that I was going to major in psychology. And another reason was that psychology major did not require any extra math courses because I'm horrible. I'm like not a very good stereotype of Asians in math. Like I am horrible in math. So it worked out. You know, I like psychology. I only had to take statistics, and I was done with all my math requirement. And the plan was once I was majoring in psychology and finding it really fascinating, and I was like, oh, I can do this. At that time, University of Hawaii, I don't know about now, but had a very, very strong graduate program for psychology. So my senior year in my last year in college, the idea was I was going to apply to grad school in psychology. And if and when I got in, then I was going to I was going to approach my dad and say, hey, about this whole ministry thing, I got into the school of psychology and I'm going to do that instead. That was my plan. But before I could even turn in my application, my dad called me over and said, "Hey, there's this conference that's happening and you're going there." Like it was no like my non-Korean friends couldn't understand because I was 23 at the time. No, I was 22 at the time. It was going to be the weekend on my 23rd birthday. My friends were like, "Why can't you just say no?" And I was like, "Because no is not an option. You know, my dad said I'm going, and so I have to go." And it's like, "No, that's not how it works. You're 22 years old." I'm like, "I don't care how old I am. My dad's still gonna beat me if I don't listen to him. Like there's I'm not gonna risk it." So and then I went to this conference, and that's when I realized that no, my next step isn't grad school in psychology, but it's grad school in seminary. So. I never like had this one thing that I wanted to be when I was a kid, like growing up, it was a various thing that, either by real, but that reality said, no, you're not, you can't do that because you don't draw, you can't color in the lines very well. You can't do that because you can't keep rhythm or play, more than five chords, whatnot. So it's just like process of elimination. Here I am.
Could you share more about your time getting your undergraduate at the University of Hawaii, Manoa? What kind of campus life was like, defining moments that you had?
Yeah, I dormed my first year, which was very, very interesting. I had um uh, I didn't choose my roommate. My first and second semester of college, my roommates were assigned to me. And the first roommate, he was nice, but he was a little bit odd, and for the last 2 months of the semester, he just decided that he wasn't going to do laundry, and I would go home every weekend because my mom would still do my laundry for me. So I just take all my dirty laundry, go home, and then spend the weekend at home, and then come back on Sunday. When I came every week, I come back, I open the door, and I just remember the smell that would hit you. And I was like, Kurt, you got to do something, man. It's like, oh no, it's fine. I'll just Febreze it. I'm like, no, this is a little bit more than Febrezing. But Febreze isn't going to take care of this. And then my second and third year, I commuted, and my last year, I dormed again. Um, but like I am assuming University of Hawaii had like fraternities that you could and sororities that people could pledge to, but I we were so my wife makes fun of me for this too. We were just, really like easygoing, stay out of trouble kind of kids. And in senior year in high school, four friends of mine, so five of us, for whatever I think it was a random bus trip home from a away football game or band competition. We decided that we're gonna start an a cappella group. And we were okay. We were pretty decent. We sang at all of our good friends graduation parties and whatnot. So on Thursday evenings, because we all went home on Fridays, on Thursday evenings, every Thursday we would meet in this section called the Japanese Garden in the camp on campus that would have very good acoustics. And we spend an hour and a half there. While other kids are like drinking and going, like, we're just hanging out, the four of us, because one of them was in California for school, just practicing and singing harmonies and figuring out like how we do this song and arranging songs and whatnot. And so I did not have the typical uh, college experience of being away from home and getting into trouble. And since I stayed in Hawaii, like everyone, the Korean community is so small. So everyone, if they don't know my dad, they know of my dad. So then, I can't like get, there's that pressure or expectations that I can't get myself in too big trouble. I have to be careful who I interact with because who knows how that their parents know my dad, and I don't want word getting back to my dad, that whatever. So we just spent a lot of our free time playing like games and practicing a cappella singing. So that was a lot of my college experience.
And were a lot of your friends and social circles during college people you had met prior? Was it a lot of people local to the area as well?
Most of my friends were all the friends that I made in marching band in high school. We all went to University of Hawaii, and then the new friends I made was I ended up joining the Korean Student Association, and I made a lot of friends there. But I rarely got to do the events, the social events that they did because um I was part of it was I was worried that someone would tell my dad, like, oh, your son was out, karaokeing and drinking and he's around with people who was smoking, so he must be smoking and all that stuff. So I was too scared of that I didn't want to go. And a lot of times I come home over the weekend and my parents still made me keep curfew. So like I couldn't go because I would miss curfew at home. So um yeah, most of my friends were and like when I had to choose between when I moved to Hawaii, I was like, am I gonna do band or am I gonna do football? Like I'm glad that I did band because all of my close friends still to this day, my closest friend to this day is the guy that I met at band. So um those friendships have were long lasting friendships, and I don't think I would have met any of them if I had chosen. I would have different group of people and maybe even different experience if I had chosen to play football instead.
And then you mentioned the conference that kind of moved you to pursue a master's in divinity instead. Could you speak more to factors that informed that decision, and then also how you ended up attending the specific seminary that you did?
Yeah, I can't put into words. I went to it's called Exploration, and it was in Chicago. And the whole conference was for kids from 14 to 25 who were exploring the call into ministry. And so, so my dad made me go there. I went there, and just they had all these seminary booths, representations from seminary there, and you got to talk to a lot of people. And as I was talking to people and talking to other people my age who were exploring, like something just clicked, like everything just snapped into focus. And I can't put into words exactly what it was, but I just knew that the next step of my life wasn't going to grad school for psychology, but was going to seminary. Like there was no other way to explain it. And I vividly remember when that realization hit me. I went to my hotel room and just like sat and stared at the wall because one, like I was like, oh man, my dad was right this whole time. And two, like, oh, is this, like, wow, I really have to go through with this. Like this makes sense. I need to go to seminary. And my number one choice was Garrett Theological Seminary, which which shares a campus, which is part of the Northwestern campus. And I really loved Chicago. But I could only get about an 80% scholarship from Garrett, at least for the first year. But Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. has a program that when I don't know if they changed it, but it used to be called the Transgenerational Korean American Studies Scholarship. And there was a scholarship for every second or third, fourth gen Korean American to go to Wesley for a full ride. So when I only could get 80% of tuition from Garrett, my dad was like, "Nope, you're going to go to Wesley because there's a scholarship there." And he knew the vice president of Wesley, so I got to go. Both my wife, I met my wife in seminary. Both of us got to go to seminary for free, which now we're very, very absolutely grateful for because seminary is not cheap, and 99% of pastors don't make enough money to pay back their loans right away. So I finished all of my education with no student loans. So yeah, I mean, really, the only reason why I went to Wesley Theological Seminary was because it was for free.
Could you share more about what your time in seminary was like, kind of what the day-to-day of that looked like, and then also I'll ask about meeting your wife afterwards, but yes.
Okay, seminary was crazy because as soon as I got there, I got a part-time job at a very, very big church, which I think was pretty much what all Korean Koreans who came to seminary did. They come to seminary and then they try to find the work at church. So I had to balance full-time schoolwork and part-time church work. But for those of you who are familiar with church and working at a church, there's no such thing as a part-time employee. You just get paid part-time, but you work full-time. Um, and I don't think I think I joke, but I'm pretty sure some of it is true. But like I'm sure that there were a handful of professors and administrators who was glad that I was graduating, leaving. I wasn't the most pleasant student to be around. Made I always ruffled feathers here and there, intentionally and sometimes unintentionally. And part of it was just really trying to figure out who I was and what my step was because I'm 24 now. This is first time living like I was still am probably my wife would say I was a mama's boy. Like I did not learn how to do my laundry till I was 24 because I was forced to live by myself. And up to then I was a very, very picky eater. My mom often cooked 3 dinners because my dad, my brother, and myself, we all had different like tastes or whatever. So my mom would make something that my dad would like, say something like my brother would like, and something like I would like. And so it allowed me to be picky. And then, like seminary, that being poor and not knowing what your next meal was going to be, immediately made me eat whatever was in front of me. But there was a lot of self-discovery that needed to happen because one of the things that seminary also did was it took everything all my beliefs that I walked into, the professors is what I tell when I tell people that go to seminary, basically what I tell them is each professor is going to have a hammer and they're going to shatter everything you believe in. And it is up to you to decide how to react to that. So, one of my first day in seminary, my first class was Hebrew Bible studies, a Hebrew Bible class, which is the Old Testament. And the very first thing that our professor says to us is if you believe that Jonah was literally swallowed by a whale or a fish and survived 3 days, and that's an actual physical, literal story, and that you believe, then you're gonna have a hard time because it's an allegory and a metaphor. It didn't happen. And I remember just like, what? Because we grew up like the Bible is the Bible. There's no, like it says what it says, it is what it is, and whatnot. So now, like first day of class, you're hearing like what you grew up with might not be true. So there was and today we call that deconstructing, but at that time there was no phrase for that. There was no word for that. But like deconstructing the faith that I grew up with for the past 23 years, and then being on my own, trying to find out like how do I the seminary was geared towards at that time, we were the first in 2003. Um, we were the first experiment of Wesley going out and trying to get straight out of college students. So there was about 9 to 15 of us who were under the age of 25, and then the rest of them were second career people. So they were like 40s and above, and it was a commuter school. So our cafeteria closes at 5:30. So after 5:30, you can't eat on campus. And so we're all thinking like, most of us who live on campus are in our 20s, and we're like, it's 7 o'clock, we're hungry. And so we're like, what do we do? And Wesley Theological Seminary shares a campus. We have access to the American University student life stuff. So there was a McDonald's there, and every quarter or so, McDonald's will do 25-cent chicken nugget days. And so my friend and I would just go and buy all the chicken nuggets we can get. I mean, like we would eat so much chicken nuggets, like we would start smelling chicken nuggets when we sweat because like yeah. So learning how to like survive on our own, trying to figure out, and also this was the first church I worked at where my dad wasn't the pastor. So like I had to relearn like boundaries and what it means to like I can't get away with stuff because my dad's not the boss anymore. And then figuring out what it means to be a Christian, and while in seminary, like all these things were just up in the air, and it was both an exhausting time and exciting time.
Um, we'll definitely touch more on your current family life later in the interview, but for now, could you share about how you met your wife during seminary?
I met my so my wife came in a semester after me, and um she also worked at the same church. She also got a job at the same church that I was working at, but in a different part. So a lot of Korean churches have what's called English ministry, EM ministries. I guess it's EMs. Um, and she worked for the EM side, and I worked for the KM side with the Korean ministry side. So we didn't really get to see each other a lot. But as I told you, like when I was in seminary, everyone else was like, except for the nine of us who were in our 20s, everyone else was in the 40s and 50s and whatnot. And I realized like my first semester with all the work and just moving around, like if I don't find someone by the time I graduate from seminary, I might be forever single. Um, so here comes this girl who's around my age. She's a little bit older than me, and she was very pretty. And we hung out all the time. We had the same classes. We worked at the same church. So we got to see each other a lot. And uh I st I think I wrote her a letter um saying how like happy I was that I have met her. But it was like, but she told me when she read the letter, it's like, oh, this guy has a really big crush on me. And I didn't think it, I mean, I did, but I didn't think it was that. But I we were close where like people, like we weren't like officially dating, but we also weren't like we also spent a lot of time with each other. So I asked her to a dinner in the movie. And I think the no, the movie was 50 First Dates with Drew Barrymore and Adam Sandler. And I thought that I was asking her out on a date because I was like, "Do you want to go see a dinner and a movie, or do you want to go see a movie and get dinner or whatever?" Or she apparently did not think that it was a date because she invited our mutual male friend to join us. And so we so so it was like I was like, oh, the whole time like what's okay, so what is this? But she says, we did dinner movies all the time. She's like, you didn't ask me out on a date. I was like, I did. But after that mishap, I think I asked her on a proper date, and that's when we started officially dating. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And then I saw that the first ministries you served in, if I'm not mistaken, you were working with like youth groups primarily and also in Korean churches. Could you share about your time in those congregations, kind of the any challenges that you faced in those roles and what those experiences were like?
Um, the challenge uh Korean people, church people are very, very interesting, and they're different from, say, your regular uh white or Anglo or American church. And part of it I think is like we're just very passionate people. And um this is generally speaking, but it seems like the underlying tone of Korean Christians, the average Korean Christians, is that a Korean American Christian, I should say, is that it's really hard to follow the teachings of Jesus. I don't think I'm gonna do that well, but I'm gonna make sure that my pastor does it well. And so there's this immense amount of like expectations and um, uh, things placed upon pastors. The reason why the transgenerational Korean scholarship exists, it still exists, is at least in the early 2000s, and there was a oh like it, there's a mass exodus of second generation Koreans. And when I say second generation, I mean all second generation beyond Korean American pastors leaving the Korean church, leaving this big need to someone to minister to the Korean American kids in the congregation that don't speak Korean. So, and the reason why a lot of Korean American pastors were leaving these immigrant churches is because we just couldn't get along. Like, there's expectations that Korean culture and Korean church culture has, and then there's how we Korean Americans view the world. Like, for instance, just because you're older than me does not mean that respect shouldn't be based upon your seniority. Like, respect should be earned. But in the Korean church culture, I'm an elder, I'm a 장로님, so you should like listen to me, whatever, because I'm older and titles matter. And so like there's all these little cultural differences that makes us butt heads. And at some point, the Korean American second gen pastor's like, I don't need this anymore. I could work at a Anglo church and be free, or leave church altogether. So to address that, this scholarship exists, and there's a stipulation that when with the scholarship, that is, when you graduate from seminary, you have to serve at a Korean church for 3 years. uh and like, it kind of makes me laugh that instead of addressing why so many Korean Americans feel like they're abused, uh, and leave with a lot of trauma from the first generation church members and church pastors and staff, instead of like addressing what's really going on here, they're just saying, here, just go to seminary for free and then suffer for 3 more years. And it doesn't really address the problem. It just hides it and masks it. And so, um, it was really difficult to navigate that. And for instance, the one of the churches I worked at, is at that time was probably the biggest Korean United Methodist Church in the States. And the parking lot is filled with fancy cars, Jaguars, Benzes, BMWs, Lexuses, Audis, and whatnot. And way before I got there was a huge controversy in that church because the senior pastor decided that that family car was going to be a Volvo. So they bought a Volvo, and a good chunk of the church was offended that the pastor was buy such a fancy car for his family. And it's like, wait a minute, you're literally driving a BMW and you're criticizing the pastor for buying a Volvo? Like, it's a Volvo. And so these kind of expectations where uh just cultural differences and cultural expectations made it really hard for us to navigate. And on top of that, you want to work with these kids and help them figure out the same identity struggles that I went through and whatnot. And sometimes the parents are helpful, other times the parents are just not understanding. I remember this one particular mother um pleading that we would like shape up, like get her son into shape and like, make them follow Jesus and do all the things. And I simply said, hey, we can all do that, for sure, but we see your son like what, 2 hours out of the week. You and your husband see your son like all the time, and like the importance of ministry begins at home. Like, you need to work on that too at home with him. And then she looks at me, she goes, well, then why are we paying you for? And I was like, all right, well, your son is never going to be okay because you're like this. So there's all these things where it just, after a while, it just starts adding up. Like, I remember hearing about the what we call the Exodus, and thinking, oh, that's never gonna be me. Like, I'm in this, I'm gonna be in the Korean church, I'm gonna do all this stuff, and I'm gonna be, the exception to the rule. I'm gonna stay as long as possible. And The last time I was at a Korean church was 2008 because after a while you're like, I can't do this no more. This is stupid. There's no change. No one's listening, and uh, it does not have to be this way. And so a lot of us, while I naively criticize a lot of my colleagues for leaving the Korean church, um, I commend them now because they had the wherewithal to choose their health and mental health over serving a church because a lot of us are trained to like suffer for the sake of Jesus Christ. So there's like keep at it and be miserable because your reward would be in heaven and whatnot. And I'm like, that was a maybe that was something I subscribed to at one point, but that's not, I just can't imagine that's what God wants us to be, like miserable all the time. No, that's awful. That's not a good way to live an abundant life. So, cultural differences and expectations are a huge thing that affects how we do ministry. I think I went on a weird tangent.
With your own experiences growing up in a Korean church and seeing your father in ministry, and then obviously your own pastoral roles, do you see a continued need for specifically immigrant like church communities, and kind of the space that they offer, and also specifically in the Korean American community?
Oh, absolutely. I think the Korean immigrant church is absolutely very, very vital and necessary and needed. Um, there's there's something personally speaking, there's something that moves me when I hear certain things in my like mother language, for lack of a better phrase. Like I barely speak Korean, but anytime like I find myself in a Korean church, which isn't often, and some like they say something or sing something, and just hearing that in Korean just like moves me. So I think it's very important that some place exists for people to experience God in the language that they are familiar with. Um, I do then have a slight issue with the second gen English ministries, because a lot of Korean American church English ministries tend to be insular and tend to be homogenous. And while our parents' church are homogenous because everyone has to speak a certain language, the EMs speak the dominant language. And there's no need for us to be simply just Korean American church. And a lot of EMs are hesitant to reach out, like it's the reverse. Like they'll bring in they'll be like the random token white guy at the Korean American English ministries because that person either loves Asian culture or truthfully speaking might have an Asian fetish, and they're just there for that reason. And that also when I was at a Korean church near the end kind of started eating at me. It's like, why are we so homogenous? Why are we all Korean American here when we all speak English? We should be able to serve others and be more multicultural. But it's really, really hard because um, a lot of our EMs don't think that way. So they take a lot of things for granted that people on the outside may not know. Like, like they'll use Konglish, and the person that doesn't know any Korean they don't take time to explain it to them or whatever. Or they'll talk about like things that most Korean Americans know, but like if you're not Korean, they don't, a lot of them don't take time to be hospitable hosts. They just assume people will know whatever and don't give them any like way to be included. So, um, while uh, I believe that the immigrant church is still very, very necessary and vital for faith formation. I kind of struggle with the Korean American churches that speak English but wants to remain Korean American. And I'm just like, at some point this just becomes a Korean American social club that kind of talks about Jesus but doesn't really follow what Jesus is teaching. But that's totally my personal thought. I'm not saying all churches are like that, but that was my last experience where I'm just like, I can't do this anymore. And bounced.
And so could you share more of the ministries that you've served in after moving on from Korean American churches exclusively, and if there was any sort of transitional like learning stage in that?
Yeah, actually, let me before that, I want to the last straw of my Korean American church experience was I was just I was burning out. I could feel it, and my body was breaking down, and I was like, I need a vacation. And so I asked my senior pastor if I can if I can take a week off to go to Vegas because my sister-in-law lives in Vegas, and uh, my senior pastor just like went off on me. He's like, you always want to go on vacation. I haven't gone on vacation for a year. This is my first time asking. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I've been here the whole time. I just need time away. And he says something like, the problem with your generation is that you want to be happy while you're serving in church. He's like, I've been here for 7 years. I have never taken a single day off. Why do you and your generation keep wanting to take days off from work, from ministry? We're about suffering. This is how we suffer. We suffer for the gospel. We suffer for the sake of our church. Our family suffers for the church. And just going off. And I was like, wow, that is not what I want to be. And that was the final straw where I was like, all right, I'm done. I can't do this. I can't live this lifestyle. I can't work for this guy because this guy's an idiot. Um, and so I left that. And then right after that was my first Anglo church, which was like that was a culture shock in of itself, and there was so much that I had to get used to. First off, um, didn't realize there was such microaggressions of racism that I had to deal with, and how do you play with that? Like, my first Sunday, I got to preach at my first white church, and it was predominantly white. After service, someone comes up to me and says, "Oh, I'm so glad you speak English very well." And I was like, "What the?" Like, I would hope so. I've been here for 30 years. Um, Things like that. Uh, 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 oh, you're Korean? I was in Korea before. I was like, oh, where were we in Korea? Oh, and during the war. I'm like, oh, okay, thank you. Like, um, so there was like that kind of aspect to get used to. The hardest one of my the hardest transition was the way that we approached faith in general, because Koreans are passionate. They're like we have the Korean churches have what's called 동성기도, where people come together and they pray out loud at the same time, and there's a lot of weeping and wailing and pounding of chest, and it's just a very intense time. Um, all of our youth ministries were geared around Bible studies, and then like we'll play games, and like our winter retreat, our church retreats were very, very intense. You want to get people, like you want these kids to like really commit to Jesus and whatnot. In the first church that I was at, my first Anglo church, games were the focus of youth ministry. Relationship was like the most important thing, and I had to put together a mission trip for the youth group. And we were going to this place that had morning devotional, a lunch devotional, and an evening worship when we all gathered together. It was a thing where we go out and build houses and make home improvements, whatever. And all the kids were like, "Why do we have to pray so much on this work trip?" And I was like, "Guys, listen to what you're saying." That was very, very incredibly difficult to first like get used to. And then after, I lasted just over a year at that church because I couldn't. It was really, really hard to transition from this intense. We have to teach our children, our youth, how to pray. To why do we pray so much? That was a really hard like thing. And then after a while, you just start adjusting and getting used to being trying to be effective and helpful in ways. And then you still run into like certain cultural differences that I never knew existed. So then in 2012, I was sent to a church in Santa Barbara. I went back to Santa Barbara. Actually, the church that my dad planted. I went back when I So United Methodist Church, the bishop sends you to church. You don't get to choose. And so I got sent to a church in Santa Barbara that I grew up in the youth ministry there because my dad planted his Korean church using that building. So it was kind of like a homecoming thing. And there was a organist whose name was Carl. He was 82 at the time, and from Sweden. I loved him to death. And one day, he pulls me aside and he says, "Hey, I want to know uh, why, when you do communion, you offer me the bread and when that you don't look me in the eyes, because that's a little bit hurtful to me." And I was like, "What?" Because and I was like, "Hey, Carl, I never meant to hurt you or offend you. It's just that." All throughout my life, we're told to not make direct eye contact with people who are, I was 30 at the time, Carl's 80, so like 50, like there's like I just don't I never felt comfortable. Like it was just, like this ingrained cultural thing where I didn't look you in the eye because for me, I would have considered that people might have considered that rude. And it's like, no, 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 no. In Sweden, if you don't make eye contact, it's because you're avoiding them or they upset you and whatnot. So I was like, oh, this is fascinating. So now I made sure like every Sunday from that on, like when Carl comes up, I'm gonna look him directly in the eyes and say, hey, like so those are all things that you just learn and play with and figure out and move around with. And then one of the things that we as people of color in ministry in churches that work at predominantly white churches have to figure out is what's worth fighting, what's worth addressing, because there's a lot of like I mean, there is a lot of microaggressive acts of racism that happens. When the last Anglo church I served at, anytime an Asian person walked in the door, it didn't matter if they were Filipino, Vietnamese, like anytime someone that looked like Asian walked in the door, without fail, someone will come up to me and say, "Your family's here." And I'm like, "Oh, my dad's here? Really? He shouldn't." I'm like, "That's you guys." They're Filipino. It was like, whoa. And so, like, is that worth fighting? Is that worth addressing and whatnot? So there's a lot of things that personally that we would have to adjust to make sure um that we remain grace-filled, but also that we kind of like, hey, that's not okay. Like Vietnamese, Filipinos, Chinese, Japanese, you know, Korean, Thai, they're all different cultures and we're not the same. And it can be offensive if you think that a Thai person is Korean or a Korean person is Thai, whatever. So yeah.
And then could you share more about your placement to the church in Pearland and then eventual move to where you currently serve?
We moved to Texas because at that time the United Methodist Church had more opportunities than where we were in California. And the cost of living would have been far more affordable than Santa Barbara, California, where we last lived before we moved to Texas. Um, and we were sent to Pearland, and there was a huge learning curve being in Pearland. In California, I was like politically and theologically on the spectrum. We were like center left, um, maybe a little bit more to the left, but we're definitely not. We weren't like extreme liberals right now. But in Pearland, I mean, that just being center left at that time made me like an extreme liberal, and so there was a lot of like things where I had to like be finesse, approach it in a finesse way so that I don't like especially when all the when because in, when all the police shootings were happening and innocent deaths of black men um and unarmed black men were dying. I remember saying, addressing things like that from the pulpit and then like just getting reamed. Uh, I remember one lady pulled me aside after service and said, because I talked about Black Lives Matter movement, and he's like, it's very irresponsible for you to be promoting a terrorist group from the pulpit. I was like, what terrorist group? What? I don't remember. And it's like, oh, the BLM is a terrorist group. I'm like, oh, okay. Then it's like I'm just good. She clearly needs to vent, so I'm just gonna keep my mouth shut and just pretend I'm listening, you know. And so it's just like a lot of, you just gotta figure out how to be effective, be your true self, but yet be relatable and still foster relationships. Because not everyone thinks the same, but just because they think different from you doesn't mean that they're evil or whatnot. So just balancing that in Texas was moving from California was a big steep learning curve.
And you currently serve at Mosaic over in Pearland, is that correct?
Yeah.
Could you share more about the mission of Mosaic, and what that experience has been like?
Yeah, so there's a little backstory too. So in 2019, the bishop of the Methodist Church was asking me to, not really asking, was moving me to someplace about 30 minutes north of Tyler. I think the city was called Chandler. And again, in the Methodist Church, the bishop tells you where to go in our jurisdiction. And I did not want to go to Chandler. I thought it would be a detrimental experience for not just me, but for my son also. My son is in the autism spectrum, and the services that he would receive in the schools in Chandler would I don't think was going to be as great as the services that he receives in Pearland, which wasn't great compared to what we received in Santa Barbara. So, like we don't want to like further decrease the services of what he was receiving. And then Houston was, especially at that time, I think we still are, but Houston was the most diverse city that we moved into. That's one of the reasons why we moved. And Chandler had like 0.01% Asian population. And I was like, man, I do not want to go back to a place where I have to tell people, oh, no, 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 I'm not Chinese. I'm Korean. There's a difference, like like how many of those can I deal with before I like explode and be like, y'all are dumb. Um, so I said no to the appointment. And again, like we're not really supposed to say no to the bishop. And it was a huge deal. Bishop gave me three options. He told me I can either go take this appointment, what we call a church placement appointment in Chandler. I can take a year off and go back into the rotation of the appointment system in 2020. But if I take a year off, I lose all of my benefits. That means that my family won't have health care, or I have to find another job that provides care benefits for my family. Or three, I can move to a different conference. And I knew that I wouldn't do number one. I was afraid to do number two because I was like, if I take the year off, find a job at like selling insurance or whatever, if I come back, there's a chance that the bishop might send me to even more of a rural place in our jurisdiction because, not that he would, but I wouldn't be surprised. And so we were trying to move back to the West Coast. I was really, really hoping to be able to move to the Pacific Northwest, particularly like in Seattle. But every single door that we were knocking on was closing, and I was starting to stress out. And then a friend of mine who works for the Diocese of Texas, the Episcopal Diocese of Texas, that I met a while back, I reached out to him just to get coffee so that I could vent. Um, and and when he met me at his coffee shop, at the coffee shop, he was like, "Hey, I have a proposal for you." And he was like, "How would you like to start a church in Pearland, but you have to do it as an Episcopalian?" And at first I said no because I didn't want to leave a denomination. I didn't want to leave one institution to learn a whole different, institution. But as that started to progress, and as I was getting more desperate, um, this idea started to make more sense. So we started exploring it and whatnot. My wife was okay with it. My parents weren't as first because they weren't sure about. They just wasn't sure about everything. But it was something where I couldn't let go, and it just seemed like a really, really like maybe this is where God is calling us. So like the timing was so suspicious. How I met Jason, who offered me the job, was like it just seemed like this was a beyond myself. And so finally, after a lot of prayer, talks with people I trust and love, mentors and whatnot, I decided to go through with it, and some turned in my credentials as a United Methodist clergy, joined the Episcopal Church, went through another ordination process with the Episcopal Church so that I can become a priest, an ordained priest in the Episcopal Church. And then we started this church called Mosaic, where we really are committed to making space for everyone and anyone who wants to find a deeper meaning of life in God. And one of the things that we really, really stress about Mosaic is when we say all, we mean all. And we are affirming and inclusive and welcoming. We're not one of those churches where we say everyone's welcome, but underneath that idea is that if you're gay, you're welcome here as long as you become straight. Like we fully celebrate our LGBTQI siblings and fully welcome them and embrace them and tell them that they are a beloved child of God as well. And that's been difficult in a city that was like 90% Trump in 2016. Um, but we are committed to making sure that people what I really want to do was connect with people who've been hurt and burned by the church and offer them space here. And then that's what we are continuing to do. Even though the people who have been hurt by church, they would talk to me and get coffee with me, but a lot of them aren't ready, if ever, to come back to a church setting. So um, I picked a wrong demographic to start a church for, but I believe that the work that we do is important, and we want to try to undo some of the harm that the church has caused to certain people over the years, and not saying that we'll be successful, but our hope is that we can provide some healing for those who've been really, really, really burned by the church and be like, that's that church wasn't what those were actions of people, not what God thinks of you and whatnot. So that's our purpose in a nutshell.
That's wonderful, thank you. And then what would you say makes you the most passionate about serving in ministry now?
I'm sorry, say that again.
What would you say makes you the most passionate about serving in ministry?
That answer is twofold. The best thing, the most like just the thing that gives you life and joy and just makes you so know that affirms and validates your call and whatnot is working with the people. When people get it, and they are really living out to like love their neighbors and love God, that makes everything so much easier and so much better and so inspiring and fulfilling and just feels like you're living a purpose. So it's the people, but at the same time, uh, the people makes the job even far more difficult than it needs to be. So people are the best part of the job, and people are the worst part of the job. But really, like when people rally around and they show compassion and empathy, and they are generous and sacrificial, that brings me so much affirmation and joy and validation that I am where I need to be.
I've also seen a lot of your writing on Rethink Church, on Ministry Matters, your book, your blog, and then also with Korean American Story and Roar Story Slam. Could you speak on what made you decide to kind of produce more public-facing writing in addition to preaching?
Um, I stumbled upon writing. I never thought I still don't think I'm a great writer, but excuse me. I enjoy writing. Um, and I had this blog since 2006, or this iteration of the blog, because I've always had like I remember like I had three Zynga pages, and if people know what Zynga is, they're we're around the same age. And just always just did it for fun. And then, when I started that blog in 2006, after about 6 years, I started to get picked up by some of the things I wrote would be picked up by like the United Methodist Church and whatnot. And that gave me an in to writing for like Ministry Matters and whatnot. And then that's when I realized, oh, I really like writing. And it gave me an outlet to write to do something that's not local church related. And gave me enough to be like to be creative as much as I can and not be limited by because like within the church you can't there's oftentimes like with institutions you may have this vision but once it goes to the institution like routes a lot of it gets chipped away because it has to fit the institution or whatever. So this blog was one way to just use a language I want to use the type of voice I want to use, rant if I wanted to rant and whatnot. And so it just gave me a nice little outlet. And turns out it was also really something I enjoyed, which was surprising because I hated reading and I hated writing in school. And then I realized, you know what? It's the assigned part I didn't like. I like reading and I like writing, but I did not like to be told what to read and what to write. And now those things are not there. And I was like, okay, so I actually did like I just was a bad student. Uh, so yeah, the being picked up by having I think his name was Shane. His name is Shane. I don't know if he's there, but Shane reached out to me from Ministry Man and says, "Hey, we want you to write monthly for this website that we're starting up." And that was the beginning of, oh wow, not only do I like writing, I can make a little bit of extra cash on writing. Like people are paying me to write, and that was a wild thing. But I'm really grateful, and am grateful that people uh read what I write despite all the grammatical like I don't edit my blog posts. So my wife would be like, you need to like spend time and just like read, like something because some of your mistakes are just horrible. And I was like, yeah, I just don't have time. But I'm really grateful that people are reading the things I write. And then the next thing was somehow, some way, I found myself um amassing a decent following on TikTok and Instagram. And kind much like writing, it also just gives me another outlet to express what I want to express and another way to connect with people that I wouldn't normally connect with. And that's been the really coolest thing of the writing and the social media stuff is just being able to hear stories of people whom I would have never met, but they happen to find this writing or find my videos and like either DM me or email me like how I may have helped them see things certain way and whatnot. And I'm really, really humbled and grateful that people take time to let me know what I put out help them see God or whatnot. So it's been interesting.
And then to move kind of into your personal life currently, could you share more about your family?
So it's just three of us, my wife and my son. My son is 13. And we met our son through fostering, and actually February 27th, 2014 is the first day that we met him. So we usually do something really fun for him on that day, which is I think next Tuesday. Um, and we were never meant we met Nathaniel as reunification. Like we thought that his parents would we were expecting to have him with us for like a year and a half to 2 years, which is the average length of kids placed in a foster system with their parents working on getting them back. But ended up that the parents weren't always following through what the court mandated. So when the opportunity came, we've decided to adopt him, and he's been with us. We finalized adoption on 2016. We had a final court date on Friday, on a Friday, and then that following Monday we moved to Texas. So we were just like racing against time to make sure all that gets done. But we we're just, um, it's just I there are moments where I feel truly blessed, and there are moments where I feel truly stressed out. But my wife is a chaplain, currently a chaplain at Texas Children's Hospital here in the Med Center, and she is a chaplain over the cancer unit. And I am very I admire her strength and whatnot, because that's some heavy stuff. The families and the kids that she ministers to and she meets with, they're all like, the patients are all kids who have cancer, and it's such a heavy thing. And to provide some care and comfort is amazing. And my wife is very, very passionate and compassionate. So I think that she excels in being. She's less awkward than I am, and she's very personable and charming. So I'm sure that she's able to provide some semblance of comfort and hope and peace when she's with the family who are going through I can't even imagine the time that they go through. But and she's also an ordained deacon in the Methodist Church. So my son is a double PK. Both of his parents are pastors. But he's so far doing okay. But we're just, I don't think there's anything unique about our family. I don't think there's anything special. We're just people like everyone else, and we all have the same similar struggles and similar joys. And we recently moved to our new house, and we moved on the week of Christmas Eve, which I don't recommend anyone ever doing. Like, if you have to move, maybe avoid the holidays. Um, uh, but we just try to do our best each and every day, and sometimes we fail and sometimes we succeed.
Earlier, you had mentioned being mindful of how you're raising your son in terms of kind of protecting him from a lot of the pressures of being a PK. And so I feel like within and outside of that, could you share some of the values that you're hoping to instill in him and kind of the thought process in raising him?
Um, I'm trying to find I don't know if there's like a correct way to say this, because it's gonna, I'll just say it. On one hand, the fact that he's on the spectrum, I think, helps him to avoid the things that my wife and I experienced growing up under the church and whatnot. And the other thing is he's growing up in a more American cultural church rather than a Korean immigrant church. Um, so uh, I don't think we have to. I don't think you have to be extra careful if he was a typical kid, uh, but for whatever reason, people just really, really, absolutely love him. And he's always a happy presence, a happy source, and people genuinely like being around him. So I don't think there's anything that we can, because that's just who he is. We didn't raise him that way. From the first day we met him, he always had this smile, like, kid, there's, like, he was 3.5 when we met him, and I was like, and his first 3 years were very difficult for a 3-year-old. Like, we received all the reports after we adopted him. The paper was like this thick of reports, and we were reading through it. I couldn't read through it because I was like, it was too heartbreaking. But my wife read through it, and she gave me the cliff notes, and we are just like, how is this kid still smiling? Like, that's just a so I think that resilience and joy is just embedded in him, and I think people experience it. So more than anything, I think one of the things that I've been working on is to make sure that I don't snuff out the joy that is in him. That we continue to allow him to be free and express his feelings and whatnot, and um and not to silence him or whatever. So uh I definitely, if he was a typical child, it would be different. But because he is unique and on the spectrum of on the autism spectrum, I think on one hand, it it kind of like we are like, just be you, because just be your happy self, and we don't try to tamper that down. But it's always a unique balance of teaching him boundaries and space. And yes, you can give anyone hugs, but like, let's ask someone, and then be my sometimes, he's not aware of personal space, so he's like up to someone's face, like right here, and it's like, hey, like, they love you, but maybe step it back. You don't have to like be in their face. So those are things that we work with him on church stuff, not like behave, not like dress what you, and I let him we let him dress how he wants for church. So a lot of times he's wearing sweatpants and t-shirts, and his hair is like messy. And I'm like, all right, whatever, let's go. To which, if that was me, my dad would have like beat me, taken me back home, made me change, and then beat me again. And then we go to church and be like, he'd be happy. I don't care, you got two spankings, but we're at church. You're at God's house. Be happy. And we're like, okay, I'm happy. So we just, both my wife and I just want to make sure that, one, he is accepted for who he is, and that he feels comfortable, but also like, let's also let other people feel comfortable. Like, not everyone wants someone in their face 2 inches away. Like, we need to get back. So for us, it's more like social mindfulness rather than anything else, to make sure that he's able to be his joyful self.
Would you say that you're still close with your parents and your brother in your current life?
Oh, yeah. All of my family moved to Houston after we moved here, so we're all here. So my brother is in Katy. Uh, my brother and his wife are in Katy, and my parents, I think their lease is up, and I think they're gonna move to Katy as well, to be closer to them, because they often watch our their kid, who's 3 years old, Lily, often. So my mom was like, well, if we have to move, might as well move to Katy so that we don't have to drive so much back and forth. But still very, very close to my parents. Still, my dad's still the first person I go to if I need some kind of advice, church related. About 10 years ago, I realized that my dad and I are very, very, very similar uh, in our approach to ministry. We are we are very, very antagonistic. We antagonize the authority, whether intentionally or not. And when my dad told me a story about how he got into a discussion with one of his superiors, like uh, about church thing, and I was like, oh my God, that's exactly what I would have done. And so it's one of those realizations where I'm like, oh, cool, and like, oh no, am I going to be my dad? Um, but we're still very, very close. In fact, I try to meet my brother as much as possible, but he got a new job, so it's not as he used to work at Rice, um at the like AV department and whatnot. And when he was there, it was far more flexible, and I could swing by, pick him up, and go to lunch and whatnot. But try to still be the dutiful son, and try to see my parents at least once a week. Uh although that doesn't happen often. But still very, very close. And it's just the four of us. And I think because we moved around so much growing up, that it forced us to be really, really close, because when we moved to a new city, all I had was my brother. Even though we're 7 years apart, it's still someone who I could play with, and didn't, wasn't too lonely when he was there, and we would play games and whatnot. So um, yeah, I am very grateful that they all moved to Houston, and that we're not too far away. I still often have to translate stuff for my parents. So, um, like you know, um, I still do. I have to accompany my dad to his urology appointments, which is still very, very awkward. And last time I was there, there were two other older Korean men with like their sons, and I'm like, oh man, we all looked at each other, and we're all in the same boat. Like this is awkward, but we got to help our parents because, like they moved to the States for us, so we got this one little thing we can do. So yeah, it's just really, really am grateful for my family being here and that we're still very, very close.
That's wonderful. And then I have a few questions about identity for the archive. So we've talked around this a lot, but how would you identify yourself ethnically? Would you say Korean, Korean American?
Ethnically, I would probably say, um, I think, uh, I think I'm more American Korean rather than Korean American. Um, but I don't think people who aren't Korean understand what that means. Um, we moved to Korea we moved to America when I was 6, so I've been, and I've been more uh exposed to the Western culture than the Korean culture. But there are still things within me that are very Korean that I can't eliminate. Like I still, I still refer to people who are older than me like Mr. and Mrs. because I feel uncomfortable addressing them by just simply their name. Um, and I there's still moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that this part of Korean stuff is still within me. But yeah, I'm definitely more American in thought and action, but there's no way to not deny that. Like, I guess the simple saying is you can take the kid out of Korea, but you can't take the Korea out of the kid. So like there are still mo incidents where I'm just like, oh yeah, I'm still very, very Korean. So uh American Korean is I think how often I define myself.
And then at this point in your life, what do you feel most proud of?
Oh, at this point of my life, I think what I'm most proud of is just being alive. I mean, I know that's like such a easy, short, low bar, but um, I'm just really, I don't know, I'm just really grateful for where we are in our lives today. Both my wife and I having, a steady job, um, and being able to provide Nathaniel a life that we didn't have, and just the connections that we have made. Like I'm more, I don't know if there's something I'm proud of. Like obviously I'm proud of my son of who he's becoming and proud of my wife and the things that she's done. But um, I'm just more. I'm trying to be, and therefore I am more grateful of where we are and the accomplishments that we have made rather than being proud of something. I don't know what I can name like I'm proud of, but I'm when I take a moment to sit back, I'm just overwhelmed with gratitude that both my wife and I are um, just lifestyle, financial wise, are far better off than our sets of parents were at our age. And like it's one of the things where we're very honored, guilt driven, and proud of and grateful of all these things happening. Like, oh wow, like we bought a new home, um, and this wouldn't have happened if our parents weren't so hard on us growing up and whatnot. So more than anything, I'm just really grateful of where we are in life and just I guess one of the things that we can be proud of is we try to be more of a contributing citizen to our city rather than just um, taking and taking. We try to uh, give back and create spaces and create connections to let people know that they really matter and they really love. So I guess that's something that I could be proud of. But more than anything else, I'm just grateful for where we are in our lives today.
That's really wonderful. And then when and where do you feel most at home? And then also, could you speak to whether you've been able to connect with Asian American or Korean American communities in Greater Houston?
I feel most at home when I'm at home and just hanging out with my family. Um, and and you know, that doesn't have to be at home, but like, you know, when we just the three of us are there laughing and enjoying each other's company and usually food and whatnot, those moments are very, very small, but like really powerful and lasting. As for the connecting with others, it's been really hard. Um, the first so when Korean American Story came and they did the Story Slam in Houston, that was the first time that was last year. So we've been in Houston for 5 or 6 years. That was the first time where I got to connect with other Korean Americans in Houston. Um, and then I slowly I met this longtime Korean American pastor in Houston, and we got coffee and whatnot. So I'm slowly making my way back there. But it's really I have it's really hard trying to connect with Korean Americans in church, especially in church here, because um, there's a little bit of like Korean church trauma that I haven't completely walked through, and it's just like, you know, just something happens. I'm just like, oh my God, here we go again. Um, that kind of deal. And the other thing is I haven't had that many chances to connect with other Korean. I mean, like one of the things that we wanted to do with Mosaic is we're in West Pearland where it's a little bit more diverse than East Pearland, and we were trying to make a diverse community, but it's really hard to you know, like the Hispanic people of Pearland have are either Catholic or Pentecostal, if they go to church. The Black community have their own history of church, and the Asians that they go to church either go to like a more charismatic church than say like a Episcopal church and whatnot. So it's really hard to it's just so the short answer is I want to, but one, I haven't had a really good chance to, and two, I haven't like put myself out there to do so either. So when things like Korean American Story events happen, that's been the easiest way to get connected and to meet people and then stay connected that way. So there's a handful of people that I've stayed in contact with after the Story Slam in Houston that are Korean Americans. Uh, that said, I would like to be connected to more Asians and particularly Koreans in the greater Houston area. It's just never really our paths rarely cross. So um, it's been hard.
Right, right. I'd also like to ask, do you have any hobbies or interests outside of your career and outside of ministry that you'd like to share?
I do like writing, and then my son and I are season ticket holders to the Houston Dynamo, which is a professional soccer team here. So season starts this Saturday, so we're really excited to go back to Shell Energy Stadium to go watch the Dynamo play. And my wife and I, we just love binging shows. And since the pandemic, we've been like. I, since the pandemic, we've been like all in on Korean dramas. Like I think Crash Landing on You just ignited our desire to watch Korean drama. Like I used to watch Korean dramas. She never watched any, but I used to watch a lot when I was in high school, early college, and just stopped one day. And then now like everything we watch is like Korean drama. Like we just finished Marry My Husband, and we're like, oh, that was so good.
My last question is if Nathaniel or your children were to watch this in the future, what is a message that you'd want to give them?
That no matter where you are, who you become, that you are always loved. I think that's the one thing I want anyone and every, especially my son, but anyone to know that, hey, you are always loved. You might not feel it, but that doesn't mean that you're not loved.
Thank you so much. That's all I have. Is there anything you'd like to add that we haven't covered yet?
No, ma'am.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for all of your time and for sharing your life with the archive. Yeah, it was wonderful being able to speak with you.
Thank you so much for your time too.